So, Frederic and Kevin, many thanks for that very, very interesting presentation. It's really interesting piece of not just in the interim and looking at the situation in the context of COVID, but also long term as well. We've got just a few minutes for questions, so do pop them into the Q&A section on the right hand side. I should also mention that Stage22 is a sponsor. If you do have the opportunity, please do click in the sponsor section of the website and go and stop by their pod, and I'm sure they'd be delighted to connect. First question that's come in: how do you take into account data from tourists that do not need accommodation? And first of all, does that make sense to look at that segment?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So I'm not entirely sure exactly what direction meant as far as does that make sense to that segment, if the segment is referring to the tourists that need accommodation. So if that's the case, then looking at the tourists that will need accommodation for us does make sense, simply for the fact that, especially in these circumstances, people that will travel after COVID will very likely be traveling at a certain distance that will require some form of accommodation. To the second point, how do you take into account data from tourists that do not need accommodation? I mean, I'm going to be very honest. Realistically, our business is really revolving right now mainly around accommodation. So as much as we do have some data relating to users that, for example, interacts with the map but not necessarily books accommodation, most of our information right now, and as you saw during the presentation, is geared around those that need accommodation. I'll be honest, you're 100% right. If we want to have a holistic view of this whole pandemic situation, the best thing would have to have all the data. I'm a data person first, so of course I would be delighted to have all of that. The good news is Stay22 is currently working into adding another service pretty soon, where we would be looking at something outside accommodation, so more like experiences and activities and such. So this will allow us to get to gather more information on this other type of vertical of tourists that necessarily does not look for accommodation, but maybe more for activities and such.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's difficult not to look at everything through the sort of prism of coronavirus at the moment. There were some encouraging signs from your presentation about the potential for things getting back to normal. But just on that, how convinced are you that is the case when event operators themselves are placing such an emphasis now on digital?
Well, if I may, I think it's it's just looking at the numbers, and for us, I mean, are we certain? No, there's no certainty. Our current data does not necessarily guarantee the future, but essentially, I think the biggest takeaway is that all proportions kept, right? We're seeing the same type of intent for event travel as we had pre-pandemic. So, basic linear projection would be that more volume comes in, and we should have a similar amount of event travel happening after that. And I think, that's just the data, but also philosophically speaking, I mean, the digital event now is the kind of only solution towards event. There's no alternative. And our data showed there's a lot of pent up demand, in the sense that there's a lot of demand that's not finding supply. And that once supply arrives, and will we see 10 out of 10 convert as we did pre-pandemic? Maybe not. Maybe some fear will happen, but maybe 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10. So really more of an evolution and less of a revolution that we're to really believe.
Absolutely. Listen, really appreciate your time again, Frederic and Kevin. We have to wrap it up there, but thanks very much, and we'll go back to Mark in the studio.